It was 3:47 in the
Don't
morning
cry,
when
Mommy's
Adiz
here.
Mosu sat on the cold tiled floor of her bedroom in Egbida, Lagos, dialing the same number for the 9th time that night. Rain hammered the roof above her like something angry. Her daughter, barely 3 weeks old, screamed from the small cot beside the bed, hungry, unsettled, sensing perhaps that her mother's hands were shaking too hard to hold her properly. Adiz pressed the phone to her ear and listened, again, to the same cold, robotic voice that had greeted her 8 times already that night. "The number you are calling is currently unreachable. Please try again later." She threw the phone onto the bed, buried her face in her palms, and screamed into a pillow so her neighbors wouldn't hear a married woman falling apart at 4 in the morning. Somewhere, thousands of kilometers away, in a country she had never set foot in, something had gone terribly wrong, and she had no way of knowing what. Before we go any further into this story, I want to pause and speak to you directly, brothers and sisters. If you are new here, welcome. If you have been here before, you already know what we do. We tell the stories nobody else is brave enough to tell, the way they actually happened, without sugarcoating and without shortcuts. So if you have not subscribed yet, do it right now, before you get too deep into this story to remember. Drop a like on this video too, because it tells us you want more of this. And comment the words, "I am watching," right now, so we know you are here with us till the very end, because trust me, brothers and sisters, you do not want to miss how this story ends. Now, let us go back to the beginning, and let us understand exactly how a woman ended up on her bedroom floor at 4 in the morning, listening to a phone number that would never ring again. Adiz was 26 years old when she married Chidi in a small, colorful ceremony in Owerri. Anyone who knew the two of them back then would tell you the same thing. Chidi was the kind of man Nigerian mothers pointed to in church and whispered about to their own daughters. Soft-spoken, hard-working, first son of his family. A man with a plan, and not just any plan, but a plan he had been chasing for almost 4 years, relocating abroad, the thing everybody now simply calls Joppa, as if the word alone could summarize 4 years of failed visa interviews, one devastating scam that swallowed 600,000 naira overnight, and countless nights of Chidi staring at his laptop screen at 2 in the morning, refreshing an embassy portal that refused to give him good news. Then, on the 3rd attempt, through a study permit connection in Canada, it worked. He came home waving the approval letter like a man who had just won a lottery he had been playing his entire life. He lifted Adiz off her feet in the small parlor of their rented flat and spun her around while she laughed and begged him to put her down before she vomited on him, because by then she was 4 months pregnant and her stomach did not appreciate sudden movement. "Baby, this is it," he said, breathless, still holding her. "This is our own breakthrough. I go first. I settle down. And before this our child clocks 2 years, I promise you, we will all be together in Canada." She remembers believing him completely. Not the polite kind of belief people extend out of love, the real, unshakable kind. Because for 4 years she had watched this man fight for this exact moment, and now here it was, sitting in his hands like proof that patience actually pays. They sold what little they had. His mother emptied a small savings account she had been quietly building from her provisions shop for over a decade. Adiz's own father, a retired civil servant, 68 years old with blood pressure that was no longer something to joke about, handed over what remained of his pension gratuity without hesitation, because that is what family does when one person says, "I found a way out for all of us." 3 weeks of chaos followed. Aunties arrived uninvited with advice nobody asked for. Chidi's mother cooked party jollof every weekend for the send-off, insisting the occasion deserved a proper celebration even without a full budget for one. Adiz packed his bags herself. She folded his shirts with a tenderness that felt sacred, tucked dried pepper soup spice and Gary into a small Ghana must-go bag, in case the food there doesn't sit right with you at first. She had encouraged him through 2 failed visa attempts. She had sat beside him and cried when the scam took their money. This plan was not his alone. It was theirs. On the day he left, she stood at the departure gate of the Murtala Muhammad International Airport, 7 months pregnant, her feet swollen so badly inside her slippers that none of her real shoes fit anymore, and watched her husband disappear behind frosted glass doors that separated those who were leaving from those who were staying behind. He turned back once. He waved. He mouthed the words, "I love you, I will call you when I land." She smiled and waved back, one hand resting on her belly, telling herself this was not goodbye. This was simply the beginning of something bigger. Brothers and sisters, I need you to remember this moment, because everything that happens after this point is going to test you emotionally. Some of you watching are going to get angry. Some of you are going to cry. Some of you are going to want to reach through this screen and shake somebody. I only ask one thing of you: stay with this story until the very last word, because I promise you, what you think is happening here is not what is actually happening. And while you're staying, do me a favor, hit that like button now, because it genuinely helps this story reach someone out there tonight who might need to hear it. Let's continue. For the first month, everything unfolded exactly as promised. Chidi called every single day, sometimes twice. He described Toronto in such vivid detail that Adiz felt like she had already walked its streets herself, the cold that beat through 3 layers of clothing, snow that turned. Strange shades of orange under the streetlights at night, the unusual politeness of Canadians who apologized even when you were the one who bumped into them. "Baby, when you come here, you will love it," he told her one night, his voice warm through the crackling international line. No wahala for light. No wahala for water. Everything just runs. What Adiz did not know, what none of them fully understood back then, was exactly how Chidi was managing to send even the small amounts of money he was sending, or why he sounded so composed on calls that came, more often than not, at strange, exhausted hours of the night. The truth was that Chidi had quietly taken on far more than he had ever admitted to his wife. A part-time job stacking shelves overnight in a grocery store. A second job delivering food by bicycle through freezing weather between his college classes. A third, informal arrangement helping a Nigerian-owned moving company on weekends, lifting furniture for cash in hand. He was working close to 80 hours a week, on top of keeping up with the coursework his study permit legally required him to maintain. He never told her the extent of it. Not because he was hiding a secret life, though that is exactly what it would come to look like from the outside. He hid it because he did not want her worrying from thousands of kilometers away with nothing she could do about it. He had made a promise, and in his mind, this was simply what the promise required. Whatever it cost him. Slowly, the calls grew shorter. "Baby, I'm at work, let me call you back," became a sentence she heard more and more, followed by calls that returned hours later than promised, his voice sounding thinner each time, more distracted, tired in a way that reached beyond ordinary exhaustion. 2 calls a day became 1 call a day. 1 call a day became 1 call every 2 or 3 days. It was Ngozi, Adiz's elder sister, who first said out loud the thing that had been quietly forming in everyone's mind. "Ada," she said one evening, sitting across from her sister with her arms folded, "I don't like this. A man does not go quiet like this on his heavily pregnant wife unless something has changed on his side. You know how these things go. Man travels, man forgets. It happens every day." "Don't say that," Adi snapped, sharper than she intended. "You don't know him the way I know him." "I'm not saying I know him better than you," Ngozi replied, her voice rising slightly. "I'm saying I know men. And I know what it looks like when a man starts disappearing on purpose." Their mother, sitting nearby peeling yam, did not look up from the bowl in her lap, but she spoke quietly, the way older women often do when they already suspect the worst but do not want to be the ones to say it first. "Let us not curse the boy before we hear from him properly. But Ada, My daughter, keep your eyes open. Belief is good. Blindness is not. Addis walked out of the room that evening rather than continue the conversation, because some part of her, the part she refused to look directly at, was terrified they might be right. Brothers and sisters, be honest with me in the comments right now. If your own family started warning you about someone you loved, would you listen, or would you defend that person the way Addis did? Type your answer below, because I promise you, this question is going to matter a lot more by the end of this video than it seems right now. By the time Addis was 8.5 months pregnant, swollen-ankled, sleeping poorly, alone in a city where her own mother lived 4 hours away by road, Chidi's calls had reduced to text messages sent at odd hours. Short. Distracted. Sometimes nothing more than, "How far, hope you're fine. Very tired today, we'll call tomorrow." Tomorrow rarely came the way he promised. She told herself it was the stress of settling in a new country. She told herself Canada was hard, that international students worked themselves to exhaustion trying to build a foundation, that this was simply the season of sacrifice every Joppa family had to endure before the harvest. She had no way of knowing just how literally true that word, sacrifice, was about to become. 9 days before she was due to deliver, she called him with news that should have made any father's heart swell. The doctor had confirmed the baby was in perfect position, heartbeat strong and steady, everything ready. He did not pick up. She called again an hour later. No answer. She called 4 more times that night. Nothing. Her father, a quiet man who rarely raised his voice, finally lost his patience one evening when Addis mentioned that she still hadn't heard from Chidi in 5 days. "This is enough," he said, slamming his hand on the table hard enough to make the cups rattle. "We sold my gratuity for this man's ticket, and now he cannot even pick up a phone for his own wife who is about to give birth. If this continues, I will call his father myself." "Papa, please," Addis begged, tears already threatening. "Don't do anything yet. Let me try to reach him myself first." "You have been trying yourself for weeks," her father shot back. "Trying has not worked." Addis went into labor on a rainy Tuesday night in October. Ngozi rushed her to a small private hospital in Egbida, the same one they had chosen months earlier for being affordable and close to home. Labor lasted 11 hours. 11 hours of pain, of pushing, of a nurse holding her hand because there was no husband in that waiting room to do it, of Ngozi wiping sweat from her forehead and whispering, "You are strong, Ada, you are so strong," over and over like a chant meant to hold the both of them together. At 6:42 in the morning, Addis gave birth to a baby girl. She named her Chidima, God is good, even in the middle of everything that felt anything but certain, because that is how many Nigerian mothers hold on to faith, naming their pain-born children after the very hope they are struggling to keep alive. She called Chidi that same morning to tell him he was a father. The call did not connect at all. Not a decline. Not a busy tone. Just silence, the kind that comes from a phone switched off entirely. She tried again that afternoon. Same result. She sat in the hospital bed with her newborn daughter wrapped against her chest, staring at her phone screen, inventing explanations, a lost charger, a dead battery, a new SIM card, anything except the thought she kept forcing back down. 3 days passed with no word. Then 5. Then a full week. By the 10th day, Addis had stopped eating properly. Sleep came only in the exhausted, broken naps new mothers grab between feedings. Ngozi had begun calling around, reaching out to the 1 or 2 Nigerian contacts they knew Chidi had mentioned in Toronto, desperate for anyone who might know something, anything, about why he had gone completely silent at the exact moment he had a newborn daughter waiting to hear his voice. By the time word started circling among relatives that Chidi had not been heard from in over a week, a different kind of rumor began to spread, faster and uglier than anyone could control. "You know how it is with these men when they cross over," Auntie Ife said one afternoon, loud enough for half the compound to hear as she sat on a plastic chair fanning herself. Once they see one fair-skinned Oyabo woman or one big-eyed Nigerian babe with a green card, they forget the wife and pikin they left suffering at home. It has happened to better women than Ada. Better women, I'm telling you. Auntie, please, Ngozi cut in sharply. We don't know that yet. We don't know, but we've seen it before, Auntie Ife pressed, unbothered. How many of our girls have I watched go through this same thing? The man goes quiet, the man starts avoiding video calls, the man suddenly cannot pick up but he's posting new shoes and new jackets on WhatsApp status. Mark my words, that boy has found comfort somewhere, and poor Ada is sitting here waiting like a fool. Those words traveled through the family faster than any of them expected, and by the time they reached Addis, sitting in a hospital bed with her daughter barely a week old, they landed like a slap. They are saying he's found another woman, Ngozi admitted quietly, unable to hide it from her sister any longer. Auntie Ife has been saying it to everybody who will listen. Addis felt something twist violently in her chest, a mixture of fury and humiliation and disbelief that made her hands shake. He would not do that to me, she said, though her voice cracked on the word not. Not after everything. Not after all of this. I'm not saying I believe it, Ngozi said carefully. I'm saying people are talking, and you need to prepare yourself, whichever way this goes. Brothers and sisters, I know exactly what some of you are thinking right now, because I've read the comments on stories like this one before. Some of you are already convinced you know exactly what kind of man Chidi is. Some of you are typing out your anger right now, ready to drag him, ready to call him every name under the sun. I want you to hold that anger for just a little while longer, because I promise you, what actually happened to Chidi is going to hit you a lot harder than betrayal ever could. But before we get there, subscribe if you haven't, comment, brothers and sisters, I'm still here, and let's keep going, because this story is about to take a turn none of you are prepared for. The call came on the 11th day, from a young man named Obinna, Chidi's cousin, who had traveled to Canada around the same time and had kept loose contact with him. His voice, when Addis picked up, was already breaking before he said a single word. Ada, he said, then stopped. Obinna, talk to me, she said, her heart hammering. Please, whatever it is, just say it. Has he found somebody else? Just tell me. I can take it. Just tell me the truth. There was a long, terrible silence on the line. Ada, it's not that, Obinna finally said, his voice trembling. I wish it was that. I wish to God it was that simple. Then what is it? She demanded, her voice rising, panic creeping in at the edges. Obinna, you are scaring me. Say something. Chidi collapsed at work 8 days ago, Obinna said, the words coming out fast now, as though he needed to get them out before he lost his nerve. He was on the overnight shift at the grocery store. He collapsed near the loading dock. They rushed him to the hospital, Ada, but by the time they got him there, his heart had already given out. The doctors said it was a massive heart attack. They said his body had been under extreme strain for months, exhaustion, no proper sleep, barely eating, working nearly every hour he wasn't in class. His heart just couldn't carry it anymore. The phone slipped from Addis' hand before she even registered letting go of it. She does not remember much of what happened in the minutes after that. She remembers Ngozi catching her before she hit the floor. She remembers someone placing baby Chidinma into her arms, as though the weight of her own daughter might be the only thing capable of anchoring her back into her body. Chidi had died 8 days earlier. 8 days during which Addis had been calling a phone that would never ring again, imagining every possible explanation except the one that was true. He had died on his 11th straight day without a full night's rest, in the middle of a double shift he had picked up specifically because a coworker's family emergency meant someone needed to cover, because every extra shift, in his mind, was one step closer to the ticket that would finally bring his wife and child to him. He never got to hear that his daughter had been born. He never got to hear her name. He died believing he was still weeks or months from finally calling Addis with good news, not knowing his daughter had already arrived into the world without him. Brothers and sisters, if this part of the story is sitting heavy in your chest right now, I need you to comment "rest in peace" below, right now, before you keep watching. Not for me. For every single person out there working themselves to exhaustion for someone they love, hoping their sacrifice will one day be enough. This story is for them too. And if you are not yet subscribed, please, subscribe now, because we are only halfway through, and what comes next will change the way you see this entire story. In the weeks that followed, Addis learned things about her husband's final months that broke her heart in a different way than she expected. Not the sharp, bitter break of betrayal she had almost prepared herself for. A slower, more devastating ache, the ache of realizing someone she loved had been suffering in silence, alone, an ocean away, choosing to carry that suffering quietly rather than let her worry. Obinna, gently, over several long phone calls, filled in the picture. Chidi had been working 3 jobs, not 1. He had been sleeping 4 hours a night, sometimes less, for months. He had been skipping meals to save money, eating the cheapest instant noodles he could find, sending nearly everything else straight into a savings account he had opened specifically for Addis and the baby's flight and settlement cost. He never complained to me either, Obinna admitted quietly. Once, he joked about being tired, and I told him to slow down, and he said, "And Ada," I remember his exact words, he said, "once you and the baby are here, I can breathe. I just need to hold on a little longer." He hadn't been avoiding her calls out of distance or distraction. He had been avoiding them because he didn't want her to hear how tired he sounded, didn't want her to worry from thousands of miles away with nothing she could do about it. Obinna told her something else. In the days before he collapsed, coworkers had noticed Chidi looked unwell, pale, unsteady, breathing heavily even during light tasks. 2 people had gently suggested he go home and rest. He thanked them, smiled, and stayed until the end of his shift anyway, because a coworker's family emergency meant the store would be short-staffed, and because every extra hour of pay was 1 hour closer to a plane ticket. He collapsed less than 40 minutes after his shift was supposed to end. "Why didn't he tell me?" Addis asked Obinna one night, her voice raw. "Why didn't he just tell me it was too much? I would have told him to slow down. I would have told him money was not worth his life." "I think," Obinna said slowly, "he was scared that if he stopped, even for 1 week, it would mean another month added to how long you had to wait. He didn't know how to explain that to you without sounding like he was failing you. There is a particular kind of grief that comes from learning someone loved you so much, and so quietly, that their love became the very thing that killed them." Addis has said this is the piece of the story she has struggled hardest to make peace with. Not anger, because there was no one left to be angry at. A guilt she carried for a long time, wondering if her own hope had pushed him too hard, if her own excitement about the plan had made him feel he could never say the words, "I am struggling, I need to slow down." She replayed their final proper phone conversation over and over, searching it for a clue she might have missed. She came to understand, slowly and painfully, that hindsight hands us a clarity that was never actually available to us in the moment we needed it. Chidi's body was eventually flown home to Nigeria, a process that took weeks and drained nearly the last of what remained of the family savings that had been meant, cruelly and ironically, for Addis's own journey to join him. The burial took place in his family's compound outside Owerri, under a canopy that had been used, months earlier, for the very send-off party that had celebrated his departure. Addis stood at the graveside with a newborn strapped to her chest, a widow before she had even fully settled into being a wife, and listened to a pastor speak about a man who had given everything so that his family might have more. She remembers little of what was said that day. She remembers small, strange details instead. The particular color of the canopy fabric. The sound of a nearby generator humming through the silence during a moment of prayer. The way Chidi mustered against her chest at the exact moment the casket was lowered, as though some part of the baby understood, in whatever way infants understand things, that something enormous and irreversible was happening. The same aunties who had cooked jollof for his send-off party now stood in the same spot, wrapped in black and white mourning cloth, some wailing openly, others simply staring, as if their minds could not reconcile the boy they had celebrated living with the man they were now burying. One of Chidi's aunts held Adi's face in both hands after the service and said quietly, "He walked like a man who thought love had to be earned through suffering." Nobody thought that boy he was allowed to rest. Adis has carried those words with her ever since. She has said the hardest part of that day was not the grief itself, but the particular loneliness of grieving a man whose absence had already been part of her daily life for months, mourning someone she had, in a strange way, already been missing long before she knew he was gone. Brothers and sisters, before we continue, I want you to do something for me. If you have anyone in your life right now who is working themselves into the ground quietly, someone who never complains, someone who always says "I'm fine" even when they clearly are not, tag them in the comments, or simply send them this video. Sometimes the people who need to hear "please rest" the most are the ones who will never ask for it themselves. And while you're at it, like this video, because this is exactly the kind of story that deserves to reach more people. Now let's continue, because Adi's story does not end at that graveside. In the weeks after the burial, Adis found herself unable to look at her phone the same way again. For months, that small device had been the only thread connecting her to her husband, the object she had stared at, willed to ring, blamed for its silence. Now it sat heavy in her hand, a reminder of every call that had gone unanswered for reasons she never could have guessed. It took her nearly a year before she stopped instinctively checking it every time she heard a notification sound that even faintly resembled his old ringtone. The months that followed were not easy, and I will not pretend otherwise, because a story that skips the hard part is not an honest one. Adis moved out of the flat in Egbida. It had been rented with money that no longer existed, income that had died with the man who earned it. She moved back in with her mother in a modest two-bedroom apartment in Oja. She had left home as a hopeful, pregnant young wife with a plan for a bright shared future. She returned as a widow with a newborn and a grief so heavy it sometimes felt physically difficult to stand up straight underneath it. Her mother never once treated her grief as something to rush through. She simply held her the first night she moved back and said, "We will figure this out together." Chidi worked himself into the ground trying to build something for you and this child. The kindest thing we can do now is make sure that effort did not die with him. Adis had trained as a fashion and textile design graduate before her marriage but had never fully pursued it, choosing instead to support Chidi's plans, to be the flexible one, the one who paused her ambitions so his could move forward. Now, with no husband, no income, and a baby who needed feeding, clothing, and constant care, she had to find something, anything, to survive, and, in a way she couldn't fully articulate at first, to honor. She started small. Very small. She began sewing baby clothes, simple things at first, ankle rompers and headbands, using an old manual sewing machine that had belonged to her grandmother, sitting untouched in a corner of her mother's apartment for over a decade. She photographed the outfits with her phone, sometimes using Chidima herself as the tiny, unwitting model, and posted them on a WhatsApp status and a newly created Instagram page she named Chidima Kids Wear, a name that, she has since said, felt like it also carried a small, quiet piece of Chidi's own name within it, a way of keeping him stitched into everything she built next. The first month, she sewed 4 outfits. She did not tell anyone how many nights she cried while sewing, needle in one hand, baby balanced on her lap, tears falling onto fabric she couldn't afford to ruin, grieving a man who had worked himself to death trying to give her a life she would now have to build entirely without him. Not everyone in the family responded to her grief with patience. Some months later, at a gathering marking Chidi's first-year memorial, one of his older uncles pulled Adis aside and told her it was time she moved on properly and considered remarrying quickly for the sake of the child, since a woman alone with a baby girl will struggle in this life. Adis stared at him for a long moment before answering, her voice steady despite the anger underneath it. With respect, uncle, your nephew worked himself to death trying to build a future for me and his daughter. I am not in a hurry to hand that future over to convenience. When I am ready, if I am ever ready, it will be my decision, not a suggestion made at a memorial dinner. He did not bring it up again, but the exchange left her shaking for hours afterward, another reminder that grief, in many Nigerian families, is rarely given the quiet space it deserves before someone starts asking what comes next. There is one night in particular that Adiz still talks about, quietly, when people ask her how she really made it through. Chidinma was 14 months old. It was the rainy season, and Lagos was doing what Lagos does best in September, flooding streets, cutting power for days at a stretch, turning every small errand into an obstacle course. Adiz had just paid rent on a tiny shop space in Oja, a decision that had emptied almost everything she'd saved. She told herself it was an investment. She told herself the orders would come. Then Chidinma spiked a fever that would not break. It started as a mild warmth in the evening, the kind every mother learns to watch but not immediately panic over. By midnight, the baby was burning, listless, refusing to feed, her small body limp in a way that made Adiz's own chest seize with a fear she had never known before, not even in labor, not even at the graveside. She rushed her to a nearby clinic at 2 a.m. Malaria, the doctor said, complicated by dehydration. Nothing life-threatening if treated immediately, but treatment meant admission, drugs, tests, money Adiz did not have. She called her mother. He called her sister. Between them, they scraped together enough for the first 24 hours. But the clinic wanted a deposit for continued admission that none of them could raise on short notice. Please, Adiz begged the nurse at the front desk, her voice cracking, my daughter needs this medication now, not tomorrow. Please, is there anything we can do? Madam, I understand, the nurse said, not unkindly, but the hospital has its policy. You need to find the balance. Sitting on a plastic chair outside a ward at nearly 4 a.m., her daughter's small hand wrapped around her finger, Adiz found herself speaking quietly out loud to Chidi, the way people sometimes speak to those they've lost when the loneliness of a crisis becomes too much to hold alone. You worked yourself to death trying to make sure we would never struggle like this, she whispered. I need you to help me find a way through tonight. A family friend who worked in the health sector, reached by Ngozi in the early hours, helped negotiate the balance. By morning, Chidinma was stable, sleeping peacefully with a drip tape to her tiny arm. That morning, something inside Adiz settled into a kind of resolve she hadn't fully had before. She understood that she could not spend the rest of her life waiting for circumstances to be easier before she built something solid. Chidi had worked himself past exhaustion trying to build a safety net under his family from thousands of miles away. The very least she could do was build the rest of that net herself, with the years she still had. From that morning forward, she stopped merely surviving month to month. She started planning. Brothers and sisters, if you've ever had a night like that, a single night that quietly changed the entire direction of your life, comment that night below, and if you're comfortable, tell us what it was. I read every single comment on these videos, and I promise you, someone else watching tonight needs to know they aren't the only one who has lived through a night like that. And if this story has held you this long, do us a favor and share it with someone who needs a reminder that people can rebuild from almost anything. Let's keep going, because Adiz's climb from here is the part of this story I am most proud to tell you. By Chidinma's second birthday, Adiz had upgraded from the old manual machine to a second-hand electric one, purchased with money she had saved, naira by naira, from over a year of sewing late into the night after her daughter slept. She had also taken on a young apprentice, a 17-year-old girl named Blessing who lived nearby and desperately wanted to learn tailoring but couldn't afford lessons. It wasn't just the sewing that grew during this period. It was Adiz herself. She started waking up at 5 a.m., not because anyone told her to, but because those were the only quiet hours she had before Chidinma woke up needing attention, before the world's noise crowded back in. In those early morning hours, she began teaching herself, through free tutorials on her phone, the basics of pricing, packaging, and customer service, things she picked up by watching other small business owners online and adapting what worked to her own reality. She made mistakes, plenty of them. She once accepted a bulk order for a christening from a large extended family and underpriced it so badly that she barely broke even after buying fabric and thread. She learned, the hard way, that saying yes to every order wasn't the same as running a sustainable business. Slowly, the woman who had once organized her entire emotional world around a phone that no longer rang began organizing her world instead around fabric orders, delivery schedules, and a growing list of repeat customers who trusted her name. Her mother, watching all of this unfold from the sidelines, once told her something Adiz has repeated in nearly every interview she has given since. "Ada, I watched Chidi give everything, every hour, every ounce of strength he had, to try and build something for you and this child. I have never, since that boy died, seen anyone honor a sacrifice the way you are honoring his, with your own 2 hands, wide awake at 5 in the morning, refusing to let his effort disappear into nothing. Whatever happens next, nobody can ever take this particular thing away from either of you." 2 years after his death, Adiz registered her tailoring work as an official small business, Chidinma Kids Wear Enterprises. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't a mansion or a fleet of cars. It was a small shop she rented in a modest plaza in Oja, with 2 sewing machines, a signboard she designed herself, and a growing list of customers who trusted her work. She was, for the first time since Chidi's death, building something that felt less like grief and more like a continuation, not of a marriage cut short, but of a promise a good man had died trying to keep. Brothers and sisters, let's pause here for a second, because I want to ask you something important. What do you think it takes for a widow to rebuild after a loss like this, after learning the person you loved suffered in silence rather than ask for help? I want to hear your honest thoughts in the comments, because I think the answer is different for everyone, and Adiz's answer might surprise you. Today, Chidinma Kids Wear Enterprises has grown from a single manual sewing machine in the corner of a borrowed apartment into a small but respected fashion label known throughout parts of Lagos for quality children's wear. Adiz employs 4 people now, including Blessing, her very first apprentice, who has since become a skilled tailor in her own right and now runs the shop's daily production. Adiz has spoken, in interviews with local lifestyle bloggers and on her own growing social media platform, about her journey, about Chidi, about the months of silence she once misread as distance, and about the years of quiet, determined building that followed. Her most repeated piece of advice, the one she says gets the most messages from other women and men in her comment sections, is this: if someone you love is working themselves into the ground for you, tell them it is enough. Tell them you would rather have them tired and alive beside you than exhausted and gone trying to build a future you have to enjoy without them. She never remarried, though she has said, when asked, that she isn't closed off to love. She is simply careful now, in a way grief teaches you to be, about carrying the well-being of the people she loves as tenderly as she can. A younger cousin once asked her, half joking, whether she was ever tempted to relocate abroad herself now that she had the means, to finally see the city Chidi had described in so much detail over the phone. Adiz thought about it before answering. "One day, maybe," she said. "But I would go now to see the place, not to escape from anything. There's a difference, and it took me a long time to understand it." Chidinma, now a bright, articulate child in primary school, knows her father through photographs, through the stories her mother tells her at bedtime, and through a single framed picture of him in his university library, tired-eyed and smiling, that sits above the sewing machines in the shop he never got to see. She knows him as a man who loved her before she was even born, who worked so hard to bring her mother to him that his own heart gave out trying, and who is, in every stitch of every outfit that leaves that small shop in Oja, still quietly present. Adiz has started a small, informal habit over the years, one she has spoken about softly in a couple of her interviews. Every year, on the anniversary of Chidi's death, she closes the shop for the day, takes Chidima to the small family plot outside Owerri, and tells her one new story about her father, a memory, a small detail, something Adiz had perhaps been too raw to share the year before. She says she wants her daughter to grow up knowing her father not as an absence, not as a sad footnote to her birth story, but as a full, complicated, deeply loving human being who simply ran out of time before he could show up in person the way he had always intended to. She has also, in recent years, begun quietly reaching out to other women in her community whose husbands are currently abroad on similar job journeys, not to frighten them, she is careful to say, but simply to encourage open conversations about rest, about honesty, about the difference between sacrifice and self-destruction. There is nothing wrong with working hard for your family, she tells them. But hard work should build a future you get to actually live inside, not one you die trying to reach the doorstep of. I want to end this story, brothers and sisters, not by telling you what to think about it, but by asking you something. So many of us know someone, a parent, a spouse, a sibling, a friend, who is working themselves past exhaustion right now, quietly, without complaint, convinced that the only way to prove their love is to disappear into the effort of providing for someone else. Chidi's story is not a story about a man who failed his family. It is a story about a man who loved his family so much that he forgot, tragically, to also take care of himself long enough to see the life he was building for them. If this story touched something in you tonight, I need you to do 3 things before you close this video. First, comment below with one word for the kind of love you saw in Chidi's sacrifice, or the kind of quiet strength you saw in Adiz's rebuilding. Second, like this video, not for me, but so that someone scrolling tonight, someone working 3 jobs alone in a cold apartment somewhere, someone waiting anxiously for a call that hasn't come in days, might see this story and, in some small way, feel less alone, or feel moved to finally rest. And third, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because next week, we're telling another story, this time about a woman who discovered, 7 years into her marriage, a secret her husband had been keeping since before their wedding day. Trust me, brothers and sisters, you will not want to miss it. Until then, take care of yourself, check on the people quietly caring too much around you, and remember, sometimes the greatest act of love is simply staying alive long enough to be loved back. Rest in peace, Chidi. And to everyone still building after loss, keep going. Thank you for watching, brothers and sisters. I will see you in the next story.